Hello, everyone. The topic of our discussion today is the 18th century debate in the Indian context. Charles Dickens, um, commented while writing a novel on the French Revolution that it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. The same can be aptly applied to the Indian 18th century period because that period saw a lot of new changes and it is even today surrounded with a debate. Now, 1707, Aurangzeb, the last Mughal emperor, or the last powerful Mughal emperor, is dead, and the kingdom or the empire flunks into chaos and falls into disintegration. So, the period of 18th century has been a topic of lively debate among most historians for a long period of time. Now, the historiography has also given us many innovative advances regarding this 18th century debate. The first half of the 18th century saw the Mughal decline and which was accompanied by rise of autonomous regional states. The causes of the decline of the Mughal Empire has been debated. There has been different point of views as to why the mighty Mughal Empire, that was one of the most powerful empires, declined after the death of Aurangzeb. The recent writings have focused on the 18th century as a period ungoverned by the presence of the Mughal Empire. So we see that the centralized Mughal Empire has declined. There is no umbrella power controlling the provinces. There is no doubt that there was political decline of the Mughal, and the reasons are sharply different from one historian to another. And some of the historians uh, portray the reasons of the Mughal decline as being economic crisis and exploitation on regional economic crisis and exploitation or regional growth because of economic prosperity. So basically, when we talk about the 18th century, broadly we see two kinds of views. The first view is a group of scholars focusing on decline and turmoil. On the other hand, we see a group of scholars that focus on economic growth of the regional powers. Now, a very important need is to understand the nature of change. We cannot just talk about change, but we also need to understand the kind of change that happened. And also to understand this period in terms of socio-economic reconfigurations, which led to rise of regional political powers. Now, before moving into the study of the regional formations, the enormous debate on the 18th century needs an introduction. For that, the oldest view regarding the 18th century was given by Jadunath Sarkar, who attributed the decline of the Mughal Empire to the deteriorating character of the Mughal emperors and their nobles. Now, Jadunath Sarkar has pointed out moral decay of the empire in terms of its emperors and its nobles. In his book or History of Aurangzeb, he emphasized on two policies of Aurangzeb as being the chief reasons for his decline. The first is his Deccan campaigns, and the second was the religious policy of Aurangzeb towards the Rajputs and the non-Hindus. Another view that we see is the agrarian and Jagirdari crisis view. Now, Irfan Habib, scholars like Irfan Habib and the Aligarh School of historians, they propounded the view that there was an agrarian crisis, agrarian revolts, and a crisis of Jagirs. The Aligarh School of historians argue that it was an age of chaos, anarchy. Now, Irfan Habib is in favor of the argument that the 150 years of Mughal rule starts to break down, and there is created an absence of a single umbrella ruling polity. There occurred the crisis of Jagirdari system, and the fiscal structure of the empire breaks down, leading to regional factions coming up. Habib and Athar Ali, scholars like Habib and Athar Ali, focus on the collapse of centralized imperial structure. So their focus is on the um, decline of the centralized Mughal authority. In context of the context of the breakdown is a financial crisis on agrarian crisis. The fiscal structure also breaks down and creates a competing between groups, and the cohesive framework that existed also declines. Now, because of this declining fiscal structure or fiscal system, there's redistribution of sources, redistribution of power, so to say, which was vital to maintain the empire, and direct reduction of the royal income. And we also see that there is a oppositional movement going on against the Mughals from the Jats to the Marathas, and um, these rebellions led to the decline of trade routes, stability of agriculture, and long distance trade. A a picture that depicts chaos of this period. Scholars like Satish Chandra, now like moving on to another historian or another view, Satish Chandra has given us the theory of Jagirdari crisis. And he points out that Mansab and Jagirdari shortage caused the economic crisis, and growth of power of zamindars led to frequent disruptions or frequent agrarian revolts. According to Irfan Habib, his view is that this period is one of reckless anarchy and foreign conquest. He talked about an agrarian crisis where we see high revenue demand, which led the peasants to rebel, and that affected the agrarian economy adversely. Now, these revolts can be interpreted as the political assertion of regional and communitarian identities against a central power. Also, these historians have pointed out a very important factor, that is the technological stagnation and decreased production. However, we have sources where we find that um, this view is not very appropriate. Now, Athar Ali has spoken about the cultural degradation of the ruling class and the technological failure of the Mughals in responding to the European challenges. Now, initially we have talked about the Dark Age view, and now recent historians have or after recent historiographical developments, we have come to reject this view completely. There has been a shift towards the examining of the emergence of regional powers rather than focusing on the period as a period of crisis and chaos. There was emergence of regional powers during this period, which or the successor states as we call them, which were in the way a restructured modification of Mughal institutional framework. These uh, successor states or the regional powers that came up, or even the Jats and Marathas that were in opposition to the Mughal Empire, came up with political structures that were heavily inspired by the Mughal central authority. And in that way, we see that there is a continuation of the Mughal Empire in terms of its framework, institutional framework. The peasant revolts, which augmented the interest of various zamindari powers, were essentially explanations where the focus was only on a system of revenue extraction. But later studies have proved that have worked on a political development and non-agrarian productions. Now, scholars like Bernard Cole have talked about political developments in the region of Benares, where he highlights attempts of the zamindari and the amindars to gain independent status against the imperial and regional powers. The last view is the revisionist view. C.A. Bailey is the pioneer of this revisionist approach. The revisionist scholars have talked about economic expansion when new social groups began to assert power, or where we see economic growth and growth of regional powers, in contrast to the view where we only focus on the economic decline of the Mughal Empire. Now, the revisionist historians, while treating the history of the 18th century, saw economic expansion where new social groups began to assert political power against the decline of the imperial control. However, we have come across historians of this school that differ in certain points. For example, P.J. Marshall has focused on the importance of break of communications between the Mughal state and the provinces that was considered responsible for the decline, or that the dying Mughal Empire continued to display its cultural domination in several ways, like being the source of legitimacy and sovereignty for the regional states. Now, these regional states that were coming up were drawing their legitimacy, the legitimate power or authority to rule from the Mughal um, states, for the Mughal central power. C.A. Bailey has given the view that the Mughal expansion reached beyond its limits and court factions create a political vacuum. And the powerful political successor states which emerged began to control local resources. There was political decentralization, and the Mughal magnates or the Mughal grandees or the important or powerful Mughal people in the administration, they were getting more close with the rural society. And the successor states, they were able to provide patronage and protection to the land rights and production rights of the small towns or small provinces. Then there is another view that can be regarded here, that the political decentralization was the result of the broadened process of localization in distribution and redistribution of power. Frank Perlin, another historian, has pointed out that the nature of political order attained change because of intensification of economic life. Now, he dismisses that the Mughal Maratha centric treatment of the history and talked about the existence of wide varieties of methods of governance and revenue collection, which were time and space specific. So he focuses on different um, methods of governance that were different in different regions. Another confirmation of economic prosperity of the period was given by Bertenstein. He has argued that the economy was dynamic and there was relocation and restoration of production. The new sources, um, like investment, money flowed to new resources, the regional powers, and money gained importance. There was more competition for labor control, which highlights the significant aspects of new economic relations that emerged. And now it is also important to examine the indicators and factors that are common in all the arguments. And all the arguments, whether it is decline or sorry, whether it is the revisionist, whatever the revisionist view is, one view that is common is the regional state formation. As we see in the Mughal regime, the relations between the state and the local population, which was predominantly agricultural, were determined by agricultural production. Now, we see that it was not the land but the produce that was taxed. The officials were paid in terms of revenue assignments. But we also see that there was many other types of people who claimed share in revenue produce for different reasons and rights. The zamindars with the hereditary rights over land have throughout been an uncompromising relationship with the state or with the center. The central authority was also acting as a force for destabilization because of factionalism, wars, weak rulers, and constant uprisings. So these are kind of the causes of decline that are common in all the views given by the different historians. Destabilization because of factionalism, that is the growing factionalism or growing divide in the Mughal nobility, wars, foreign invasions, um, then weak rulers or weak successors. That is, after Aurangzeb, we have a list of weak successors. And also constant uprising, constant rebellions, the dissatisfied gentry or dissatisfied uh, cultivators or the villagers have always revolted agricultural in the context of agricultural decline. The inabilities and the weaknesses of the center to cope with the problems of the local level or the local people led to the entrenchment of provincial governors who attempted to mobilize the local resources. So when the center became weak or when the center was not able to handle the local dissatisfactions or local aspirations, the governors, provincial governors who had control over these local areas, and since the center is so far away in the like Mughal empire is so large and the center is so far away from the provinces, these governors gained extreme power and control. The administration also became more commercialized as the regional status took over. Now, this reflects one thing, that how the earlier forms of agrarian relations, land holdings, and state finances were changing and moving into new directions. While which makes the study of the successor states very crucial in understanding the 18th century. So basically, when we talk about the 18th century, One view is of decline and chaos, and the other view is of um, growth of regional powers. In that context, we also have the idea whether it was a dark age, or it was a century of growth, or it was a century of continuity or break from the earlier structures. In terms of dark age, we have talked about Jadunath Sarkar's view. In terms of growth, we have to focus on the revisionist scholars like C.A. Bailey and P.J. Marshall. Then, when we talk about continuity, whether it was a continuation of the earlier order, we see that the regional powers that came up, or the Jats and the Marathas that were in opposition, also developed frameworks that were very similar or very highly inspired by the ruling center, Mughal authority. And we need to also see if it was a break from the previous order with the coming of the European powers, with the coming of the British and the rise of the East India Company and its domination after 1765. 1707, Aurangzeb is dead, and by 1765, we see the rise of the East India Company. So that is all for this is a short overview on the 18th century debate. Thank you.